should I? Like, a part of me just doesn't really want to, because I loved the character so much and I loved the original stories or vignettes so much that I don't know if a sequel will cheapen my experience. Oh, I don't know. I'm really conflicted about this. Hey guys, welcome to the Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. Today I'm going to take a hard look at my TBR, okay? Not my whole TBR, because my TBR has 210 books. So I'm just going to look at the last few books that I added to my TBR, talk to you about them, and see if I can work out why I added them to my TBR in the first place. So the first book that I have is 3 novels, okay, by Agatha Christoph. Okay, the first book I have is 3 novels. That's the title of the book. It's one single volume, but it includes 3 novels by this Hungarian author. And the novels are The Notebook, The Proof, and The Third Lie. Now, why did I add this book? I don't know anything about this book, actually, but I know a little bit about the author, and I have read one of her previous books. Okay, so that's why I want to read more from her. So a while ago, I went into one of my local bookstores, and the very nice bookseller there told me about this writer and recommended these 3 novels, as a matter of fact. But I wasn't too sure about it. It's a bit of a chunkster. I'm still reading, what do you call it, Duck's Newbury Report. So, you know, I just didn't think the time was right for me to buy another chunkster. Not until I finished Duck's and a couple of others that I already own, okay? So, you know, I came back home and I looked her up and I bought one of her shorter books, L'Analphabet, which she wrote in French, you know, and she actually writes in French. She is Hungarian, and this is really important. When I read L'Analphabet, I found out her life story, a little bit of her life story. L'Analphabet is a very, very short book. But she tells about how she became a refugee in Switzerland from her native Hungary back in the 1980s, I believe, maybe a little bit earlier than that. She moved to Switzerland, and she moved into a French-speaking area of Switzerland. At the beginning, she spoke no French, and it took her a couple of years to actually get a handle on the language and be able to speak it. The problem was that she could not read or write in French, which was incredibly frustrating because she was already a writer and she loved writing more than anything. So she enrolled in a course and she had to go to the lowest possible level because her writing and her reading skills were practically non-existent. And upon doing that, the tutor said to her, "Hey, what are you doing here? Your French is really good." And she said, "Yeah, but I can't read it or write it." So she went to classes and she also taught herself at home, and she became a French writer. I mean, isn't that amazing? She learned another language as an adult, and she became a celebrated writer in that other language. So she's someone that I'm fascinated by, and I loved L'Analphabet. It is a short book, so I read it in an afternoon, just in under a couple of hours, I think, and I loved it. So yeah, that's why The Notebook, The Proof, and The Third Lie, even though there's 3 novels, they're 1 volume, and they're the first book that I have, the most recent book that I added on my TBR. Then I have 2 books by Hermann Hesse. I have The Glass Bead Game and Steppenwolf. And I've added those because in December, I read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and I absolutely loved it. So I want to read more from him. I looked up his most famous novels. The Glass Bead Game came up, and then Steppenwolf was one that I actually knew from high school. And I have a feeling that I should have read that when I was in high school, but I let you know when I do read it. Then I have Cloud Street by Tim Winton, The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri, and Flights by Olga Tokarczuk. So those are authors that I have either not read, or, you know, in the case of Olga Tokarczuk, I've only read one of her books and I want to read the other famous book. But those 3 books I'm going to do as buddy reads. If you're interested in buddy reading with me, I am sorry, but I've already arranged with people to read those 3 books, so no can do this time. But yeah, those 3 books I really want to read with other people, and I know very little about them. I haven't read anything by Jhumpa Lahiri or by Tim Winton, so I'm really excited to discover two authors. The next one's really easy. I have Night Boat to Tangier, and this is a book that was in the New York Times best of list for 2019 books. No, that sounds wrong. It's not that many books. It's not 2019 books. It's a list that got published in December 2019 with the best books of the year. And so I read all the books in the fiction section except this one because I couldn't find it. I mean, I couldn't find it. I could find it, but I couldn't get it as an ebook, and as a physical book it would take too long to arrive. So I didn't bother buying it because I knew I couldn't possibly read it before the end of the year. But maybe I'll read it this year. You never know. Then I have The Red and the Black by Stendhal. This is a French classic. I've been wanting to read this book for, I don't know, 10 years, possibly longer. Last year I read some French classics in French, and so this year I want to continue that. So The Red and the Black is definitely a book that I want to read. Late last year I started reading some German or German language literature, of course in translation, and I want to continue that this year. So that must be the reason why, or the reason that I added two books by W.G. Sebald, or Sebald, I never know how to say that. And those books are Austerlitz, which I've actually read. I read it many, many years ago. I don't own a copy of it anymore, unfortunately. I remember loving it, but I don't remember anything about it, so I'd love to reread it. And then I have The Rings of Saturn, which is also another really famous novel by Sebald. But I don't know anything about it and I haven't read it. But I think that's why I added them to the list, because of my newfound taste and admiration for German and German language literature, albeit in translation. Then I have a whole bunch of Brazilian books and Portuguese language books, but I don't really want to go too much into that because I don't want this channel or this video really to be a TBR where I talk a lot about books that may not be available in English. I think I've been doing that enough lately. I might talk about those books later. Of course, if I read them, I'll talk about them, but I want to skip them for the time being. And then there's an author here on my list, J.M. Coetzee. If you follow my channel, you know that one of my favorite books is Disgrace by this author. It's oh my god, it's a masterpiece. And I reread it last year and I talked about it here on my channel. And then I decided that I wanted to read more books by him, so I went and added his most famous novels on my TBR. Some of them I've already read before. They go back to the time when I first read Disgrace, but others I haven't read. And one that I haven't read that I really want to read is Life and Times of Michael Kay. I don't really know anything about this novel, but J.M. Coetzee really can write. So, you know, I'll see. I meant to read this book last year, but it just didn't happen. So I'm hoping it will happen in 2020. Okay, lots of Spanish books coming up next, but I'm gonna skip over those. And yeah, I have Doris Lessing here, which surprises me. I have The Golden Notebook, which I tried to read many, many years ago. It's very big book. And it was very good, but at the time I don't know what's happening. I must have been reading other stuff or being busy with other things, so I couldn't get into it. And I don't own that copy anymore, so I'll have to get a new one. But it's a book that I've been wanting to read for many years, and I feel really bad that I interrupted that reading because I can't remember why I did that. And it certainly had nothing to do with the book. That I can say for sure. So I don't think I was fair to that book, so I want to go back to it and read more by Doris Lessing. I also have The Fifth Child by her. I don't know, I'd love to read more from Doris Lessing because she's a writer that intrigues me, and I know a lot about her actually. For some reason, I guess I saw a few interviews and read a few interviews with her back in the day, and that's what intrigued me and made me want to read her books. But then I didn't read her books, so yeah, I love to begin with The Golden Notebook, and if I love it, then maybe branch out into the rest of her oeuvre. Yeah, I have a lot of Spanish language books here, and I noticed that I have a lot of books by Miguel de Unamuno. He's a writer from the beginning of the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century, Spanish writer. He's a classic. I've read a couple of his books, and I don't want to go into the titles right now, but I want to read more Spanish language literature this year, particularly the classics, because I feel really uneducated when it comes to Spanish language literature. And I feel bad because Spanish is my first language, but it's hard for me because I really do love American literature and also English literature. So, and I feel more at home there, like I know how to navigate around the time periods and the different authors and the different styles and the different schools and all of that. And I feel a little bit more distant from Spanish language literature because I never really studied it in college. I mean, I didn't study it in college at all. So I just studied it in high school, and that wasn't really enough. So I keep going back to the same authors over and over again in my head. And I'd love to go back to those authors, really, get to know their works, and then branch out into other classics and even contemporary Spanish language literature. Of course, a lot of those books are also available in English. So, if I talk to them in my channel, I try to point you to English language translations so you can read along or enjoy the same books I do. Wow, there's a book here that I added last year called The Pisces by Melissa Broder. And I think this book was kind of problematic. And a lot of people talked about this book here on BookTube. And, they had very mixed reviews. And it had so many mixed reviews, or the reviews were rather so mixed that I wanted to read it to make up my own mind, but for some reason I didn't. So I'm wondering if it's worth it. So if you've read The Pisces or you think I should read it for some reason, let me know in the comment section down below, because otherwise I might just skip over it. I really love Elif Kitteridge, which I read last year, and I watched the miniseries when it first came out on HBO. And late last year, Olive Again by Elizabeth Strout came out. So it's the sequel. And I'm on the fence about it, on the fence on whether I want to read it, of course, because I haven't. Should I? Like, a part of me just doesn't really want to, because I loved the character so much and I loved the original stories or vignettes so much that I don't know if a sequel will cheapen my experience. I don't know. I'm really conflicted about this. So again, if you've read it, let me know, because I don't know what to do. A book I know I want to read this year is The Idiot by Elif Batuman. Now, I've heard about this author and about this book ever since it first came out. And, for some reason, I just haven't read it. And I'd love to read it. I couldn't tell you much about the book right now. I think this is because she's written several books and I haven't read any of them, but I'm aware of them. So I tend to mix them all up in my little head. But I think The Idiot is her first book. And I think it's about her love for Russian literature. I might be getting this all wrong and I'm not even going to look it up, but whether that's the book or the other book is the one about Russian literature, I want to read all her books, but I think I might begin with The Idiot. Okay, I have a bunch of Paul Auster books, something by Joyce Carol Oates, James Baldwin, Another Country, Go Tell It on the Mountain, Just Above My Head, If Beale Street Could Talk. I think I added those because I feel bad that I haven't read James Baldwin. I've read Giovanni's Room. I read that many years ago, but he's an incredibly important queer writer. So I feel like I should read his books. And then last year, there was that adaptation of If Beale Street Could Talk. So I think that's why I went on Goodreads and just added all his really famous books. But yeah, I haven't read any yet. I have some E.L. Doctorow, The March, Ragtime, Billy Bathgate. Yeah, again, I read the Book of Daniel years ago and I really liked it. And he's a big American author and I'm big into American literature. Perhaps I didn't read enough American literature last year, I don't know. For similar reasons, I have a lot of Don DeLillo. I have Underworld, which I tried to read once and I even owned and I just couldn't get through it, but I'd love to try again. And then I have White Noise, which I've read a couple of times, but the last time I read it was many, many years ago, so I'd love to go back to it. I also have some Cormac McCarthy. Yeah, this is my American phase, isn't it? This is when I started adding a lot of books. In fact, I've gone back into 2018, so this is before I started my channel. So I started my channel in 2019, but in 2018, I was in the mood for American literature and I wanted to read all the big American authors of the 20th century. So I made this long list and I actually read a lot. I read a lot of Philip Roth and Updike, you know, people like that. But I didn't quite make, and Don DeLillo as well, but I didn't quite make it into Cormac McCarthy's books. I know that I've read On the Road. No, On the Road is not. On the Road is Jack Kerouac, right? I know that I've read The Road but again, I read it so long ago that I'd love to reread it. But mostly I want to read the Border trilogy, all the Pretty Horses and all of those. So I have them here on my list. Then I have Sinclair Lewis for similar reasons, but I read Babbitt and I didn't love it. So that kind of put me off reading more from him. And then I have some Saul Bellow, which again, I'm not sure about him as a person, but I love to read some of his books. So I have Humboldt's Gift and Henderson, the Rain King here on my TBR. Some Thomas Pynchon, some Joyce Carol Oates once again, like We Were the Mulvaneys, that kind of thing, Zombie, yeah. And now I've gone back into 2017, so I think I'm gonna stop it, because I've given you so many titles. But please, if you've read any of the books that I discussed in this video, let me know if I should read them or not. Let me know, because I love to prioritize my TBR, put some method into it, and get these books read. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye bye.